Hello and welcome to the tutorial series on how to write crunk and dubstep and sort of break style. To scroll up and down into the sample, I'm just clicking onto this grey bar here at the top and just clicking it and dragging up and down. If you drag left and right on this bar, it also drags around, or you can click on this little black square just up here and you can achieve the same thing by clicking and dragging around that thing. Personally, I like to click just on this little grey section here and drag around. It's just the way I've been working for a long time, so I'm used to it, and that's what I do. So if we right click on this channel to get rid of these fades, if we listen to this sample with the fades on, it sounds a little bit flat. If we go show fades, and we can see it's cutting off a little bit of the front of the sample, and we drag that back, it now sounds a little bit fatter. If we drag that in again, you can hear it's lost all its attack, so we'll drag it back right to the start. Alternatively, you can go into your preferences and turn this option off forever. So we can get there by pressing Command and the comma key, or we can go to Live Preferences, and it shows you there that the shortcut for that is Command and the comma. So if we just click on Preferences and then we go to Record Warp Launch, just down here, we have these warp fades options. We have auto warp long samples, that's already turned off. By default it's turned on, but I like to have it off so when I drag in long samples of tracks or something like that, or even kicks, we can see that it's not warped. Sometimes they drop in warped, but I don't like it. I like to keep them off warping, and that way when we change the tempo of the track or anything like that, the samples don't get affected due to warping. And create fades on clip edges, that's turned on. I'm going to turn that off. So now whenever we drag in a sample, the fades are still on for some reason. If I delete both of them, drag a sample in, yeah, there's no fades on it now, see? On either side, no fades. And that's good because now we can apply our own fades and we don't have to sort of go fixing up all these little fades at the starts of our samples whenever they appear. So I'm going to drag this to the start of the track. So that's on beat 1. And that's the first thing we need, a kick. The second thing we're going to need is a snare. So to get out of my kick folder, I'm going to double click where it says parent folder. And that's going to go back to my parent folder of samples, and then I'm going to go to this folder called snares. So I'll double click on that, and then we have all these snare folders. So to navigate through these with your arrow keys, I'm just going to press the right arrow key and that'll open a folder. The left arrow key closes it, and up and down scrolls through folders. So if fashion time works is based on a click track. So if I turn this click track on up here, where these two little dots are, we can sort of watch where the beats are hitting. So you can see in there, that's one bar, and that's the main beat, like that's the first beat of the bar, and then that's the second beat, that's the third beat, and that's the fourth beat, where it says 2.2, 2.3, 2.4. So what it's saying is this is bar 2, this is beat 2 of bar 2, this is beat 3 of bar 2, and beat 4 of bar 2. So we got we basically have 4 beats per bar, and that's defined by this time signature up here where it says 4/4. If we change this to a 5, make it 5/4, notice we're given an extra beat per bar, so we now have 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, and 2.5. But I'm just going to make that 4/4 because we're writing dubstep and crunk and such, and that's all in 4/4, glitch hop and whatnot. So I'm just going to go back to the start here where I've started dropping samples, and I'm going to right click on this second channel, which is our snare channel, and go show fades, And there's no fades there again because we've turned that fading option off. So to rename these tracks, I'll just click on where it says One Audio, I'll press Command R, or alternatively we can just right click on it and choose rename, and again it shows you the shortcut next to it, Command R. So I'm going to press Command R and I'm going to rename this to Kick. And then I could just click on To Audio and press Command R again, but just after renaming this one Kick, I can just simply press the Tab key and that'll drop us down to the next channel ready to name it again, and I'm just going to name that Snare. So I'm just going to highlight the first the first bar of this arrangement by highlighting on the grid, which I did just by clicking here and dragging to the left. And I'm going to click a shortcut, Command and L, and that loops that section for us. Alternatively, again, you can highlight a section, right click, and just choose, where is it? There's a section, loop selection, and again it shows you the shortcut, Command L, and it just loops whatever you've highlighted. So I'm just going to highlight the first bar from bar 1 to the start of bar 2 and press Command L, and that'll loop that selection for us. So now if we listen to what we've got so far, we've got this. I'm just going to turn the click track off, and I'm going to move this snare to the beat of 1.3, so the third beat of the first bar, and we'll just listen to that. So we've got a simple beat happening here. I'm going to change the BPM up here, which will slow or speed the song up or down. Basically, BPM stands for beats per minute. It's how many beats there are in a minute. So at the moment there's 120 beats in 1 minute. I'm going to change that down to roughly 100 beats per minute. And now if we listen to it, it'll be much slower. I might just choose another snare quickly. I'll just go through these snares and try and find a more 4 times so I can show you in audio the difference in these waveforms. So this first one's a sine. I'll just rename this channel sine so it renames the audio clip for us, and I'll right click on the channel and I'll freeze it. Freezing the channel just basically loads it into RAM and renders the channel useless until we unfreeze it or flatten it. And then I'm going to right click it again and I'm going to choose flatten. And this is just flatten the channel for us, and we can then go in and have a look at it. And we can see that it's a really smooth waveform. It's just simple up and down, with no strong sort of sharp curves to it. So then I'll double click on this second MIDI channel and I'll choose the shape of a saw wave. Then I'll right click on the channel and I'll choose freeze, right click again, choose flatten, and that's just rendered it into audio for us. And then if we have a look at this, the waveform's just simply pushing the speaker out and then slamming it back in, pushing the speaker out, slamming it back in again, so it sounds a little bit harsher, just due to the nature of what it's doing to your speaker. This third one I'll render as a square wave, and then I'll right click it, freeze it, and flatten it. And if we go in and have a look here, it's just pushing the speaker out, sucking it back in, pushing it out, sucking it back in, etc. So that one sounds even harsher again due to the nature of the curve. And then finally we have noise, which is a really random waveform and doesn't really ever repeat itself. So we'll freeze that, flatten it by just right clicking and choosing freeze and flatten. And then if we zoom in here, we can see this waveform doesn't really have any sort of contiguous nature to it. It's always random and it sounds like white noise, like static on your TV basically. So if we solo that channel, we just listen to it, it just sounds like noise. This one sounds kind of like Mario Kart. Basically these on and off signals is all they had back in the Game Boy days, so if you want to sort of make chiptune sounding stuff, square waves are the way to go. Saw waves are generally used for lead sounds and bass lines and stuff. So that's pretty similar to a square wave. It just has a has the shortcut there for us, Shift, Command and M. So if we click that, we've inserted a MIDI clip. And then I'll double click on this MIDI clip, and here we have the piano roll, which is where we insert our MIDI information. So to create a note, I'm just going to double click wherever. It doesn't really matter because white noise doesn't have a pitch, as I said. So we'll just double click, and then if we drag to the right of the note, it creates this little bracket for us, and we can click on that and we can drag it out as far as we want. So we're just going to drag it to the end of the clip. Then we see we have this clip here in the arrangement view with some MIDI information in it. Then I'm going to double click on this MIDI channel again. It's going to take us back to the device, and we have noise. However, I don't want it to shoot down as it does. You can hear the volume getting really quiet towards the end. It's going like... I want that to be a continuous stream of the same volume of noise. So I'm going to click on this pane over here. It says amp 1. sorry, yeah, 10 milliseconds after the attack stage, it's shooting down to the sustain time, which is at 0, which it actually should be minus infinity, because if we turn it up, it's just between a 0 and a 1, so it's not measured in decibels, but 0 just means it's at the quietest point, which to us means pretty much inaudible. So 10 milliseconds after this attack stage, it's going to shoot down to a value of 0, which is really, really quiet. And to listen to that, it's just going to be like a really sharp hit. Pretty much just a click. So it doesn't really matter where we put this decay, because we just want to turn the sustain up anyway, so it doesn't really matter if we put this decay at 15 seconds or 5 milliseconds, because it's not going to shoot down to any different sort of value anyway, it's just going to stay at 1. So that's what we have so far, but after we stop the sound, you can hear a bit of a tail on the end of it. That's the release. It's how far after the information has stopped that it keeps producing noise, and we want that to be at 5 milliseconds also, so as soon as we stop playing the sound, it stops producing noise. And that's what we want there. So I'm just going to turn the fader down a little bit, because it's a little bit loud. But I'm going to turn the volume up on the device, and I'm going to try and get the output of this device just here sitting at 0. So if we go and have a look in the mixer window, it's pretty close to 0 dB on the output here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop an equalizer after it. Just here, and you have these different sections in the Live's devices windows. You have instruments, MIDI effects, and audio effects. So I'm going to open up the audio effects. To get to analog, we just opened up the instruments pane, and we have analog, collision, electric, external instruments, impulse, operator, samplers, drum racks, all sorts of interesting stuff which we'll get into later. But for the moment, I just want to go into the audio effects folder and just get an EQ8, and I'll drag that after the device. And then what I'll do is I'll start cutting frequencies. By clicking down here, we can change the different shapes of these poles. Essentially what an EQ is I guess you'd say like a carving device. Say imagine a wood carver, he's got a piece of wood and he wants to shape that piece of wood into something else. You would use an EQ for this, and it works in terms of frequencies. So if we have a look here, we've got 100 Hertz, 1 kilohertz, and 10 kilohertz. And essentially we can cut out that 100 Hertz or boost 1 kilohertz, or basically do whatever we want with the frequencies. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change the shape of this first pole. Down here we have multiple different shapes. We have a bell curve, which will just sort of shelf it. Oh, sorry, that's a shelf, not a bell. This is a bell curve, which produces the shape of a bell. If we put it up, you can see that looks kind of like a bell. We have a rejection filter or a notch filter. If we click that, it just cuts single frequencies. This one here was a low shelf, and then we have a high shelf also, which cuts everything above that point. The low shelf cuts everything below that point. And then finally we have a low pass filter, which lets all the low frequencies something that's at 0 dB. If we turn this EQ off and play it, it's almost 1 decibel under clipping. But once we start to cut away frequencies with this EQ, it actually clips by a decibel, so it adds almost 2 decibels of output just by cutting with the EQ. We don't want that. We want to keep a really nice clean signal chain signal path happening, or I guess you'd call it gain structure. So the point of that was just to show you to turn the samples down at the sample stage and not at the fader stage, because you'll just save yourself from clipping equalizers and other assorted plugins that you might chuck in after the sample. So to turn all these down, I'm just going to highlight all of them, and then down here where we have this volume option, I'm just going to click negative by pressing the minus key, and then I'll choose maybe 8. So we've turned everything down to -8, and we haven't touched the faders. If we listen to this, so we've got a nice sort of low level clean beat happening now. And now the next stage, I guess, for this would be to try and nail this snare sound and get it sounding really nice and big. So to do that, I'll just keep listening to it and affecting it in different ways. So I think this top one needs to be a little bit louder, so instead of making that -8, I'll make that -4, which should still be fine. It shouldn't clip any plugins. And we'll have a listen to that. That didn't really do what I wanted it to, so I'll just turn it back down to -8, and I'll try transposing it down 12 semitones and see how that sounds. That still sounds a little bit weird. Try putting it up to 0 again. I'll try fading the body one out a lot quicker so you're left with the tail of this one. And I might just offset this one a little bit. Maybe a bit more. Not quite that much. I'll offset it to a value that's not on this grid. We can do this 2 different ways. We can right click somewhere and we can choose off, and we can just drag this wherever we want. However, if we don't want to turn that grid off, I'll just turn it back to 16 or whatever. We can click on it, and we can hold the command key and we can drag it wherever we want without snapping it to this 16th value. So I'm going to bring this forward to about here. And that's what we want. It's given it that sort of late delay sound to it. Fade this back a little bit more. Bring this back to here so it's a bit more even. I might keep a bit of that tail. That's what we want. So we've got the snare sorted now. Sounds good. So now I want to EQ this kick. So I don't like the frequencies in the center of it, so we'll just EQ those out. So I'm just going to EQ out roughly about 800 Hertz maybe. If we turn that off and just do an A-B comparison, we can hear the difference. So it just sounds a little bit smoother, a little bit less boxy. So I'm going to cut 10 decibels out of 800 Hertz, and I'm just going to mess with the quality factor of it a little bit to make that cut a little bit sharper. Sharper, just so I'm not cutting as much meat out of the, what would that be, the 200 Hertz and the 3000 Hertz range. So I'm just going to click on this pole and just start bringing the Q factor up to where I like it. So we've just cut a little bit out of the middle. It just sounds a little bit better, I think. That's without it. And that's with it. The second thing I'm going to do is take a cut out of 36 Hertz by moving this frequency control down to 36 Hertz by just clicking on it, typing 36 and then pressing enter. And then I'm going to turn that into a high pass filter. So I'm cutting everything below 36 Hertz because there's not much interesting stuff down there anyway, and it just cleans the mix up a little bit. So that's with the 36 Hertz filter on it, and this is without it, with it, without it. So you can't really tell the difference at all, but it just tidies the low and the highs up a little bit. Although your ears can't tell the difference between this 36 hertz cut just here, your software definitely does tell the difference, and it just opens up a little bit of headroom towards the end of the mix and allows you to, I guess, just get everything a little bit louder towards the end. Headroom is basically just the amount of volume you have above clipping that you can push your mix. The third thing I want to do is make the kick a bit snappier. So I'm going to push everything above roughly 5K with a high shelf. I'm going to move this quality value up. So it's just basically pushing up all these frequencies above 5,000 hertz by about 3 decibels just to make it a bit snappier. So that's with it. I'll just turn it off. That's without it. That's with it. Without it. It sounds a bit flat without it. And just adds that extra sort of crunchy snap to it when we put it there. And then the next thing I'll do is do another cut at the highs at roughly 20K. Again, you can't tell the difference with this, it's just a headroom thing. So I think that sounds much better with the EQ. Sounds a bit boxy and a bit flat without it. And it sounds nice and snappy with it. And then we've got to go EQ these snares, so I'll just solo this first snare body. So it's pretty snappy already, but again I'm just going to cut the lows and I'm just going to bring this frequency knob up until I can start to hear it sort of really start to make a difference to the sound, and then just lay off it a bit. So we'll start at about 50 hertz and just keep working our way up. I'll just put a loop around this point by highlighting it, pressing Command L. Notice I've put a loop around that point there and press Command L, and it's actually looped double that distance for us. That's just simply because the loop point can't loop less than a 1 beat. Even if we turn the grid off and try to move it, it won't go any further than 1 beat. So I'm just going to loop that and keep listening to it until we get to the point where it starts to make a difference. So you can hear about there, it starts to make a big difference. So I'm just going to lay off it a little bit. So it hasn't made a huge difference, but we've just cut all the unnecessary low frequencies out of it that we don't need. And I'm going to do the same thing with the high frequencies. So I'm going to start at 20K and just work 22K, sorry, and just work my way back. So about there, I noticed it making a big difference at about 13K, so I brought it back up to about 16 or 17. And now we've just cut out all the unnecessary frequencies from that we don't need. And now we can work around this center bit, trying to get everything in there that we want. So again, I'm just going to loop it, and it sounds a little bit too flat again, so I'm going to try and make it a bit snappier by pushing 2K up a little bit, maybe by about 3 dB, and I'll just add a bit fatter of a curve to it by bringing the quality down. So that's with it, that's without it, that's with it, and I might push maybe around 10K up a little bit as well, but I'll just give this a little bit of a thin curve, only maybe by about 2 dB, and that'll just make it sort of snap out a little bit harder, I think. That's with it. That's without it. That's with it. And that's without it. So it sounds just a little bit sort of crunchier now. If we turn the EQ off and just do an A-B comparison, we can hear the difference. So this is with the EQ. And this is without the EQ. With it. And without it. So it sounds a little less bassier and it has a little bit more snap to it now. I'm just turning this device on and off just by clicking on this little yellow button up here on the left. It's just a device on-off parameter. You can see when we turn it off, everything on the device grays out, and when we turn it on, it all becomes pretty and orange. Okay, and then the second thing we have to do now is EQ the top snare. So to start off, I'll have it in solo and just clean it up a little bit, but then to finalize the EQing, I have to listen to it with the other snare to kind of see how they're going to interact. So we just listen to this in loop again and double click on this EQ8 to drop it into the channel. Again, the first thing I'm going to do is start cutting the lows and the highs just to tidy it up and get everything out of it that we don't actually need. And then I'm going to deal with the middle section, so I'll just do that now. So again, at around 250 Hz, I can tell a bit of a difference, so I'll just bring it back a little bit. And then the same thing with the high frequencies. So again, it's about 17K, it's around the same as the one before it. So pretty much from this we can say that a snare sits from about 200 Hz to about 17 kilohertz, and there's not much else we're interested in beyond those frequency ranges. So again, I'll try and push up around maybe 3K this time to get a bit more snap into it. That's with it. That's without it. So it's just made it a little bit snappier. And I might cut 500 Hz out of this one, just so it's a little less bassy, because we don't really want bass in this one. So that's with it. Oops. That's without it. That's with it. That's without it. So it just makes it a little less bassier. So if we listen to both of these together now, they sound a bit tidier. I might add a bit more body to this one by bringing the fade out a bit more. That sounds a bit better. And I might just transpose it down a bit to stretch it a little bit. Make it a little bit fatter. That sounds pretty good. So I'll just loop between bar 1 and 2 now, and we'll just have a listen to this. And what I'll do is I'll macro map the device on and off to a key. I'll do this by clicking where it says key up here, or by pressing Command K, and you see everything turns orange. So now what I want to do is map a key to turn all these devices off. So I'm just going to click onto this device on and off and click the button Q, and see it's mapped Q to kick EQ8 device on. And the same thing with the snare, map that to Q, and snare top Q. Whoops, that was the tab key. Q, and then we'll get rid of this snare top slot 4 thing because that was an accident. So now if we press the Q button, it turns every EQ on every channel off. I like to use the button Q for this just because it sounds like EQ, the letter Q. So if we listen to this and then we turn the EQs on and off, we'll be able to tell the difference pretty dramatically. So we'll listen to it with the EQs. This is with them. And this is without them. With them. Without them. So it sounds a little bit muddy without them. I'm going to leave them on, obviously. Then the next thing I want to do is add some hi-hats and some cymbals and stuff. So I'll create 3 channels for this. The first channel I'll call CL hats. This is for closed hats. The next channel I'll call OP hats, which is for open hats. And the next channel I'll call crash, which is for crash cymbals. And then I just opened all 3 channels by pressing the right arrow key, up, right arrow key, up, right arrow key. And that's just opened all these channels for us. Then I'll go back to my samples folder and we'll start choosing some hi-hats. So I have a folder here called hats, closed hats folders. I'll just go to one of these randomly, press the right arrow key to open it, and then press the down keys to start listening to them. flat at the moment, but in the mix I think it'll sound fine. So if we listen to it in the mix. So that sounds nice. The next thing to do is to get an open hat. So I'll go back to my hats folder and I'll go to this open hi-hats folder, I guess, and just listen. So I'll just choose this one, I guess. It sounds a bit rough, but we can fix that up. So I want to put this on every second beat of the bar. So I'll just trim that sample just by the same way that we trim the MIDI notes. If we go to the end of the sample and we see this little bracket here, and we can just drag that in. So I'll just drag it in, make it 1 beat long, and then I'll And then I only want this symbol to happen every 4 bars, so I'll duplicate this beat a couple of times. I've just done that by starting from this top point of the loop, highlighting everything. I haven't highlighted the crash because I don't want that to happen every bar. I just want that to happen every 4 bars, and then I've pressed Command D 3 times to duplicate it a couple of times. Now we've got from the start of bar 1 to the end of bar 4 and the beginning of bar 5. So I'll highlight all of that and just click Command L for loop. I'll just close all these channels for the moment. I'm just doing this by clicking on where it says kick and then pressing the left arrow key down, and just shutting all those channels. And then this crash, I'll consolidate it so it consolidates with that fade on it, and I'll just delete the end of it because we don't really need that, and then we'll have a listen to this. So that's sounding pretty good. I want it to sort of have a bit more impact just before the drop of the next beat. So I'm going to hold the Option key or Alt on Mac and drag this over just before this, the last snare, and that'll duplicate that for us. Alternatively, we can highlight that section and just press Command D and that'll duplicate it there for us, but I just like to hold Alt so I can see exactly where the end point of this is happening with the snare. And the reason for that is so I can double click on this sample, and down here where we've turned the volume down, just above that there's a control that says REV, that stands for reverse. We want to reverse this sample. And what will happen is this symbol will now gradually increase in amplitude just before this snare hit, and it'll give it a little bit more power on the last hit. So we have a listen to that. So it kind of gives it a bit more of a drop feeling. I don't want it to be that loud, and I want it to sort of creep up a lot quicker, so I'm going to put a really hard fade on it. I'm going to turn it down to maybe -12. That's a bit better. So it's a little bit quieter, so it contrasts to the loud crash which happens just after it. And it gives it a bit more power in the drop. And then finally, I think I want to put a bit more kick patterns in, just to sort of vary it up a bit and make it a bit more interesting. So we have a listen to this. I'll just start sort of duplicating kicks and putting them in different places and pitching them up and down and changing the volumes to create a bit of variation. So I want to put a kick just before this start of this second bar, so I'll right click on the grid and I'll go to triplet grid because I kind of want to give it a bit of a swingy feel. Then I'll right click again and put it on 16ths. So we want to put a kick probably at this point here, so I'll just highlight that much kick, press Command C, and then click where I want to start that sample from and press Command V. You see it's put a little bit of sample there for us. So now if we listen to this, it sounds like this. I actually wanted to put it at that point, I think. That's it, so it has a bit of a jolted swing feel to it. And I want to put a fade on this first sample so it has more of a pop to it, and then I'll transpose it up 12 semitones by clicking on this same point down the bottom here where we have the reverse and the volume functions. And I'll click on transpose and I'll press the shift key and then the up arrow key, and it's gone up 12 semitones. If we have a listen to that, it sounds like this. So that sounds a bit more funky now. So I probably want to put another kick in here somewhere. Maybe there. Maybe make this another high one. I might just duplicate this sample and paste it over this one and then delete the tail that we just left there of the other one and put another hard fade on it. Maybe put another sample just before this snare. Maybe one beat forward. Maybe put it there. Maybe put that one there and then put another big one just there. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. And then I might duplicate this little high-pitched one just before this big one again. I might put a couple of small ones there. So that sounds pretty good, except I want a bit of dynamics here, so I'll make the first one, this first beat, a little quieter than this second one. So we'll make that -12 and put a harder fade on it. And I'll make the one just before the big kick -12 with a hard fade as well, just by clicking on it, holding Alt and dragging it over to that point. So we'll have a listen to that now. So there's a bit more dynamics, and I might pitch this last one up to -24, sorry, +24 by just holding Shift again and clicking the up key. That sounds pretty good. And I might make this one 15, just to give it a bit of variation. I might make this final one a little louder as well, maybe put it back to -8 now that it's pitched up a little bit. So that sounds pretty good. And then I'll just delete these two kicks here, and I'll just duplicate this whole pattern here. We'll see how that sounds now. So that sounds a bit good, pretty good. The crash is sounding a bit weird still, I think, so I might cut a bit more lows out of it. I'll just listen to it from this last crash and see how it goes. Yeah, so that sounds pretty good now. Maybe cut a little bit more highs out of it. So that sounds good. And then finally I might just make this, both of them, a little bit quieter. I could do it by highlighting both these samples and actually turning the sample down, but I'm just going to use the fader here, I think. Just turn it down maybe 1 decibel. Maybe just add a little bit more highs into it. So that sounds good now. I'm happy with that beat, and at this point I'm going to save it so I don't lose my work. So to do that, I'm just going to press Command S, and then I'm going to go to the desktop, and I'm just going to create a folder on my desktop, and I'm going to call the folder how to write crunk, I guess, and create that folder. And within that folder I'm going to save everything related to this tutorials into this one spot, so I can't sort of lose it and there's not, stuff scattered everywhere over my hard drive. Finally I'm going to choose Save As. I'll just call the project Crunk Tutorials and save it. And now it's saying, would you like to delete the temporary files? I'm going to go yes, I don't want the temporary files. And then if we go to the desktop and we check out this How to Write Crunk folder, we go to Samples, Processed, and it has the crash that we've consolidated, and it has the reverse crash as well. But it doesn't have our kicks, it doesn't have our snares or our hi-hats or anything like that. To put all those in this folder, we have to choose Collect All and Save. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to go to Live, I'm going to go File, Collect All and Save, OK. falls before it hits these faders, which doesn't really matter anyway because most of the faders are at 0. And then I'm going to send both of these snares to the reverb. We can do this in this window here, or we can go to the mix window, and we have these send controls here, and this is how much signal we're sending to the reverb. So I want to send both the snares to the reverb at once, so I'm going to highlight both of these channels by clicking on one of them, holding the shift key and then clicking on the other, and then you can see both of these sends turn up at the same time. So I'm just going to listen to it and slowly turn it up until I like the amount of reverb in it. I'll just double click up here to reset my playhead and then press play. So that's pretty good. I might send the top a little bit further to the reverb. And I might make the reverb tail a bit shorter, maybe around 700 milliseconds. So that sounds pretty good. And then I might just send a little bit of closed hat and crash to the reverb also. So I'll just play it again and just keep turning it up until I'm happy with it. Yep, so that's pretty good. So now if we listen to this reverb channel, we can just hear a little bit of reverb signal in there. If we want to make this reverb louder, we can put a utility plugin after it, which is basically just a gain control, and just turn that up. I might make the size a little bit bigger of the reverb. So that's a bit better with a big size, I think. Maybe a little bit less pre-delay. So now I'll have a listen to that with the beat, see how it sounds. So it's a bit too loud now, so I'll bring the gain down on this utility plugin until I'm happy with it. So I'm just going to map the rest of these EQs that we've put on it to this Q value. From negative infinity to 0 dB. So now by just clicking this Q button, we can take off absolutely all the processing we've added to this beat with just one button click and do an A-B comparison. So this is without all the processing. And this is with the processing. So it just sounds a little bit more professional with all of it. So I'll just collect and save this all again, make sure I've got all the samples, collect all and save, okay. So that's the end of Crunk tutorial part 1. There'll be more parts coming up soon. I think next tutorial will be concentrating on getting a bass line happening and possibly starting to work this into a bit of a tune. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed part 1, and hopefully you'll come back for part 2. So yeah, cheers, take it easy, MrBillsTunes.com.